stuck in the band. Stuck in the band. Stuck in the band.
Greetings. Good morning. Welcome to podcast number 7.
I've
Help me
lost
out, Mike.
count.
6? Well, this is a great intro already. Anywho, today is one of my picks and one of my, I guess, cult classic favorites, the Minutemen with Double Nickels on the Dime. And
Cult classic.
I don't know what car he's driving here, but this makes this album look like it was recorded in the early 60s. And of course, the other two band members are on the back. This is D. Boone, lead singer. His car has, it looks like maybe early 70s, has some serious damage. And we got Hurley here in the 50s truck looking quite dapper. But I don't know if you've ever noticed this, Mike, but so this album is called Double Nickels on the Dime. It's essentially spoofing the Sammy Hagar track, I Can't Drive 55. And if you look at this album really closely, I don't know if you know this or not, but we see Mike Watts' bushy, soft eyebrows in the rearview mirror. And you can see a big smile on his countenance here. And that's because this is going to be really tough for me to point out, but the dash here is at 55 exactly. And then the sign here somewhere in LA says San Pedro, which is their hometown, small fishing village. Some famous people from there. Working class town, which is a big part of the Minutemen.
Down by Long Beach, right?
I think farther south. I don't
Okay.
have the geography on it, but very small part of, southern LA. And here's a little blurb on them. More than any other hardcore band, the Minutemen epitomized the free-thinking, independent ideals that form the core of punk and alternative music. Wildly eclectic and politically revolutionary, the Minutemen never stayed in one place too long. They moved from punk to free jazz to funk to folk at a blinding speed. They toured and recorded at a blinding speed. During the early 80s, they were constantly on the road, turning out records whenever they had a chance, like their peers, Black Flag, Husker Du, REM, Sonic Youth, and the Meat Puppets. I think
And
that
this
kind of
album came out in 1984, correct?
1984, yeah. I'm sure there was some 1984 fear in the Minutemen's mind. They're like, maybe this will be the last album we make. Probably. I mean, to make an album with 43 tracks, albeit short tracks, not simple tracks to say the least. The longest track coming in at 2 minutes and 57 seconds, which is like 3 times the normal Minutemen song, and that song, of course, being "The Glory of Man," which is an excellent song
Oh
on
yeah.
the album. So Mike, I know you've heard this once before. Give us your hot take to kick things off here on this.
Well, so before that, I always thought that the name Minutemen was because their songs were so short, that they were all a minute long. Is that true?
Although it is the super common misconception, according to Watt, it's more like in reaction to they were in the 70s. They saw a lot of large bands. They loved like arena rock. They loved Blue Oyster Cult and a couple other things, Creedence Clearwater, working class things you might expect. But he claims it was because they were big bands and then they were minute men. They were insignificant in comparison. I think it's more also has to do with what the Revolutionary War. So this were the soldiers that were just plains folk. They would get
Hmm.
up in normal clothes, grab a pitchfork, and fight the British. But it's
Interesting.
a little combination of a lot of things.
Okay, that's helpful. Well,
Yeah.
so I don't know if I have a hot take, but I really, really enjoyed it. And like I said, I had heard the whole thing before when I went through the Rolling Stone Top 500 project.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, it's a little tough to. It can be a little impenetrable at first, I
Oh
would say.
yeah.
I did know a couple of the songs already because of you. You used to put them on mixtapes for me, so I knew The Glory of Man, I knew Corona, but I had no concept of the band. And so my take on this would be if you have no prior knowledge of the Minutemen and you sit down to listen to this album, it's going to be a little overwhelming. And what I needed was an entry point. And
Right.
so I'm so glad you sent me the documentary We Jam Econo.
Yep.
Um, that, first of all, was just brilliantly done. And I mean, it just flew by in a flash. I couldn't get enough. Just the people that they had interviewed on there, their
Yeah.
contemporaries, all the Black Flag people, and
Red Hot Chili Peppers, literally everyone from that scene. I'm
yeah,
surprised REM's not in it, actually.
the whole LA scene in particular. What that documentary did is it gave me my entry point to really start to understand them. Because to me, until I saw kind of the chemistry between D Boon and Mike Watt playing live, like once I saw that, I kind of started to get it. Like I saw just how likable they are,
Right.
how sophisticated the music is. It's like I don't even know how you define it, but I did think this was brilliant in the documentary. I got to credit Carlos Guitarlos with this. He called them avant garage.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for them, I mean, not like there's a little bit of background on them, like I said, coming out of like typical 70s stuff. And when they found like the punk scene, like it must have been amazing because I think the ethos of the punk scene is what attracted them. They were like, anyone could do this. Like we can actually play on stage. But at the same time, they weren't like, oh, we have to play three chords quickly.
Right.
They were like, no, we can keep playing where we're each playing our own part and we're playing this weird jazz rock, uh, where every member's doing something different, uh,
Distinct too.
distinctly different. And so they're each kind of writing their own parts. And, you know, it's interesting that this comes off of my jazz pick, the Herbie Hancock and your Red Hot Chili Peppers, because that kind of music, like you and I didn't understand in high school. I was trying and failing to play along with you. And then, like for these guys, they're really all writing their own songs and really doing their own music, and that's a level that is only in jazz, and that's why I think the jazz comparison comes along so much.
For
But
sure.
it used to be three essentially what would probably be frowned upon, like working class, nobodies from San Pedro, to be making music this complicated and this complex at this time with these other people. And a lot of the art punk scene was in the punk scene, especially in LA. But this music, I mean, I don't think I got it all in high school. I was just like, wow, this is really weird. This is really weird hardcore. I don't get it. It's fast, so I guess it's hardcore, but I don't understand what kind of music it is. But you're absolutely right on the documentary. And the chemistry and what the band is what the Minutemen story is.
Mhm. Well, and
So,
I think you touched on it too. They are a band of the people. You really get that sense that they're a band of the people, even though the people are spitting in their faces.
right. Yeah. Yeah, they had a lot to say, and we're probably, I mean, everyone's idealistic in their teens and 20s, but I think probably how D Boone and Mike Watt. I think George Hurley was just drumming along, but I think their ideas on everything were, idealism to a T. Like they really had a system where they were like, they have their own vocabulary.
Mhm.
Merch is merchandise, and econo is, everything's mostly abbreviated, and how they did things and touring and everything and gigs and was like their own kind of like form of just getting by, surviving because they weren't making a lot of money. It's not like double nickels really was appreciated even until like, the mid 90s at the soonest.
Yep.
Before that, it was just like, I mean, who even knows? I think it probably helped to bankrupt SST even further, to put out a double album. I mean, then they
Yeah.
probably made like 50 cents on it.
Well,
I-
I really enjoyed there's a line that stood out to me on the second time through, and that's our band could be your life
right, right, exactly.
on history lesson.
The history lesson. Yeah, this is Bob Dylan to me. Yep.
It's just they had these kind of non sequiturs
Right.
that they're kind of like I don't know, they leave you scratching your head the first time you hear them, but then the more you hear them, they just endear themselves to you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of the lyrics are not they're not, they don't I don't know if they even have like a song. Um I mean somewhat where it's with choruses and verses and stuff. They're more jotted down small like poetry. and yeah, a lot of them do really stand out. History Lesson Part Two is one of those songs that I think actually, and this is to credit them like in becoming a cult band in the 90s. I think History Lesson Part Two, and I meant to look this up. I thought of it just now. I think is actually the intro to a very big Sublime song. And of course, that Sublime album is all pastiche and a lot of ripoffs and covers, depending on your opinion. But yeah, they
Mhm.
use that. They use that This Band Could Be Your Life. So I mean, that's one of the crucial, beautiful songs on here. I jotted a few down. Like
Well, it's interesting that you bring up Sublime because I was they have some kinship, I think.
yeah.
Sublime
Oh yeah,
definitely
totally.
knowingly has a debt to the Minutemen, and you can tell
Yeah.
that in I guess it's just sort of an LA vibe. And you
Ocean thing too, like Long Beach and Pedro.
exactly working
Right.
class kind of these yeah, bringing together different elements to make something new.
hmm Oh yeah. I when I was living in the greater Southern California area, for better lack of word, I would refer to it as the lesser, but I actually worked for time in Long Beach for a booking agent, and they had a band called Bargain Music, and they were super tied into the Sublime scene from Long Beach. Had, I think, people who had played with Sublime, but they had that super eclectic sound, even more so than Sublime, but at the same time they were like 100% in the Minutemen thing too. And I think they even had some Minutemen tracks on there, and I hadn't thought about this till now, but it was completely synonymous for them. Sublime, Minutemen, those were their like, Stones and Beatles down there on the southern coast of LA. I
Well, and
mean,
there are similarities too with the lead singer's tragic early death.
right, right. I mean, fortunately for D Boone, it was a freak accident. I mean, it wasn't, I don't think the Minutemen really dabbled in like hardcore drugs or even much drugs. I've seen Watt more than any other musician, and he is one of the nicest guys. I've actually been to a show. I think I've seen him 5 times, and his just plain white van was out front, and he was in the driver's side sleeping. And I was like, there, and I've talked to him several times, and he's totally crazy. But I mean, his level of bass playing is nth degree, and like his hands are just so crazy. Like, I mean, you see that guy play, he's like pulling out bass strings, and you're like, what? Who does this? Like, he really, I love that part in the documentary where he's like talks about funk being so important. And this is where the Chili Peppers tie-in comes in
Uh-huh.
so strong with Flea because he had no idea of the bass. Like, to lighten the mood here a little bit, like in the documentary again, he didn't know what a bass looked like. This kind of follows the Hideous Kid story a little bit. Like, and he didn't understand what it was, but when he started learning the instrument, their mom was really integral into it. He 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 started listening to funk because in funk music, you can hear the bass. So in arena rock, no bass. Punk rock, no bass. Some heavy metal, yes. Some heavy metal, no. Looking at you, Metallica. Um, and but in with funk music, he could actually hear the bass. So I think the whole funk element comes in with Mike Watt. And that's because, it's so prevalent. And I guess that's because of playing on the one. Uh, you know, I'm not an expert there, but
Well, he just has this innate instinct, I guess, this
yeah,
musical instinct. And it did remind me of Hideous Kids, which by the way is our band, which we'll
right,
talk about at some point. But it did remind me of that whole approach of having the worst possible equipment
right.
and not knowing how to play anything or do anything, but making do with what you have and coming up with, in a weird way, it just spurs creativity when you don't know what you're
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah. I mean, one of the best stories with them, and I've heard it multiple times, is that they both thought so. D Boone is his real name is Dennis Dale Boone, but he goes by D Boone from back in the 70s because of E. Bloom. That's the lead singer of Blue Oyster Cult, to give you some background there. But I don't think they mentioned that in the documentary. But the funny thing is Mike Watt and D Boone are childhood friends. So they started playing, both as guitarists in like the, mid 70s. And they didn't even understand the bass, like I said before, but they didn't understand even like they literally thought that some people like they didn't understand tuning. They were like, oh, well, I like to play with my strings loose, and they're like, I like to play with them tight. Like they didn't understand anything. Like they're going from absolute ground zero. And I think when you look at that, that's where you start to go, wow. So they created this band, and they didn't really have outside things.
Hmm.
Like their first show was opening up for Black Flag. That means Black Flag already exists. So they were just like, "Oh, you're another band? Okay, let's play." And we're playing in San Pedro. But it would make perfectly good sense at the time for two completely different bands to play because they're
Hmm.
the only bands. Uh, it really says something about the I don't know, is it incubator that Minutemen came out of? Like they weren't. I mean, they cover a Steely Dan song on Double Nickels at the end, Doctor Wu, which I thought was really weird even at the time. And I think it's even weirder now that I like Steely Dan. But I mean, they were in an incubator. I'm gonna leave with that thought there.
Hmm. That's good. Well, tell me
Yeah.
about some of your favorite songs. What do you want to highlight?
Uh, I mean, I was starting to mention how even if you didn't like this album, there's so much like beautiful, like there's tracks on here, usually instrumental more, but like cohesion.
Hmm.
I really like Do You Want New Wave or Do You Want the Truth? The really political one. Corona has that real like Tejano sound, like the Tex-Mex sound. Of course, everyone knows it now as the Jackass theme, which is kind of hopefully has made Mike Watt some money. Yeah, hopefully he's got a better van. I don't know.
It is
Um,
their most streamed song on Spotify from this
it
album.
is. It is. It is. I'm pretty sure it's not political song for Michael Jackson to sing. Um, History Lesson Part Two, I think, is one of the true gems. There's a live performance of them. George Hurley, we need to mention George Hurley is playing bongos in that, and I think he's got his ridiculous hair. But that guy, uh,
Uh-huh.
he's like this amazing drummer, and he doesn't get enough cred because I think all the members are such musicians. But when you just look at him, without him, I mean, his drumming is amazing.
It is.
Amazing. And he's quite the character too. He just kind of seems like he just kind of got thrown in that band because those two guys had this awesome band in San Pedro and he was from San Pedro. And so he drums. So he's like, sure, I'll be in your band.
Well, it's a great case of like each individual part is brilliant, but you put all three together and the sum is even greater.
Yep, yep, yep. What else did I want to say? Uh,
Well, real quick, I definitely
uh-huh.
get the sense you talk about the incubator. I think you get the sense of what how Watt is so beloved in that scene and still is. And I was
Yeah.
looking a
Oh
little
yeah.
bit into his sort of what he went on to do. And he had the album in the late 90s, Ball Hog or Tugboat, that
With
had a
every musician.
with every musician. If you look at the liner notes, he's got the Beastie Boys guys on there. He's got uh
Nirvana,
Kathleen
renaming
Hanna,
Nirvana.
Flea's on there. Like there's just this, you can just tell these
Yeah.
people respect and love this man. And so
Right.
digging into this was really rewarding because I never understood those connections before.
Yeah. Yeah, that album, it's really great. And I remember when it came out, and I remember being like, wow, why is Dave Grohl and Evan Dando from the Lemonheads in this video called Piss Bottle Man? But like now I get it. I get the homage that everyone in that new scene, the at this time it was past grunge, so it was like the alternative scene, whatever the music industry is trying to label it to push it. But yeah, everyone in that scene is like, well, what about this guy?
Mhm.
This guy was from a great band. The band had to dissolve. And actually, I hadn't thought of this yet, but our first intro to Mike Watt, my first like even hearing him is Sonic Youth because they got him to play again. The first thing he ever played on was Ciccone Youth, I almost said Nirvana, but the Madonna tribute album, and he does "Burning Up" on there by himself, and
Well, and
it's
you got that phone message on Daydream Nation.
yeah, 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 yeah. What here? Yeah, and he's just this. I mean, I actually think that he is. If Neil Young is the godfather of grunge, I think that Mike Watt's only flannel outfit, which he has a fire hose, his later band. He has a fire hose album in 91. So that'd be right about pre-grunge. And it's called Flying the Flannel. So, I
Hmm.
mean, if anything, Watt is responsible for grunge too. He's responsible for a lot, but yet he's still this humble musician and character. And I mean, you see him now, and I showed you that video of him with the younger guy on drums, and I think I should know the name of the guitarist, but you see him now, he always changes the names of the band. It's like Watt and the Plumber Highwayman or something ridiculous like that. The Missing Links or something. And all those are made up. And then he just like it's like seeing a jazz musician.
Yeah,
It's the only way I can describe it. Um,
I get it.
you know,
Well,
just different instrumentation, really. So
mhm.
I have one more thing, one
Please
last thing.
go
We
ahead.
gotta go back to D Boone. D Boone, the most amazing ability to be light on his feet. The
Yeah,
guy, like, he was dancing. He apparently was having the time of his life because a rather heavy set guy, but just like jumping up and down, apparently on terrible shoes. And he has this motion that must be part of his guitar playing, because it just no, he's literally jumping straight up and down. He's just pogoing around, and it's so amazing. Like it's really tragic. They were actually opening up for REM and were poised to break big time when the tragedy happened with the car accident with him. But I mean, I always forget. I'm like, wow, they were touring with REM and like REM. IRS was like, we want you to have an IRS band, and that makes sense. But REM was like, nope, we want the Minutemen, and so they went out of their way to promote and tour with them. So it's pretty amazing,
yeah,
really
that's
amazing
good.
story. Short but incredibly huge body of work.
Yep. Well, good pick, Casey. And
Yeah,
for
fun
those
one.
watching, if you have never spent time with this album, I would say listen to it and then listen to it again, and maybe
Yep,
watch We Jam Econo
yep,
documentary on YouTube.
yep. And it's 100% the standout album. There are other good ones and some other great songs like The Anchor. But this is the one. I mean, it's very tough to find on original vinyl these days. I mean, I have no idea how many SST pressed. I would guess even if it was 20,000, that would be insane. It's probably 10,000 or maybe five, but it's pretty common for vinyl. But
Were you ready to hear my pick? What's next?
I am. Do you have an album even to
I
grab?
do. I do
I
this
guess
time.
I guess it's not Devo's first album. Uh,
No. So
okay.
I have been going back and forth. I got like five that I desperately want to do, but I'm just gonna pick one that's striking my fancy right now.
We've been springboarding pretty good here.
Yeah,
I went
well, the
jazz,
connection here,
peppers, Minutemen.
the connection here is that I think this album represents an incubator time uh,
Ah,
in the late 60s on
okay,
on the other coast.
okay,
And the album I have chosen to talk about next is
okay. The
Music from
band.
Big Pink by the band.
Okay, okay.
I know that you aren't like
Not
a
super versed.
you're not a band super fan, and I it took me a long time to get into them,
Yeah.
but you sent me this vinyl,
Yep.
and I was sitting there listening one night, and I'm like, man, this I get this. This is absolute classic, and so I'd love to talk about why.
Okay. Sounds good. I like it.
Cool. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. Thank you, Casey.
Mm-hmm. Was a good one.
See you guys next time.
All righty.